Derek, welcome to the CRO Cafe podcast. And of course, we would love to know a bit about your background and how you ended up doing content for CXL.
Sure. So I've been basically running the blog now for a little over 2 years. We have somebody on the team now that also helps run the blog. When I came in, it was sort of replacing a few people who had been doing that for a while. It's in the sort of internet context, it's been around forever. Peps started doing it back in 2011. So we're coming up on 10 years now, publishing a little over 700 posts. But I'm basically in charge of getting a couple posts out each week. I would consider myself a generalist. I used to edit encyclopedias years ago, so I'm sort of used to like working in a lot of different fields. And when I came in, my background was more in content and SEO, and I had to kind of learn more of the CRO stuff on the fly to be a really solid editor for that, knowing that PEP standards are pretty ruthless when it comes to content in general and specifically CRO stuff. Yeah. So I kind of got a crash course into it, which was also has been interesting, having been an outsider in the conversion optimization field. And then over time, sort of still mostly knowledge as an editor more than a practitioner. But it's been fascinating to learn the field and both that and just to kind of see the differences between that and some of the other segments of digital marketing. I have a lot of respect for the conversion optimization people. It's hard work.
And I know from Pep, when he started out with the CXL blog, his idea was to create the best piece of content about a really specific subject that was out there in the world. Basically, create the best piece of content. In addition to that, Pep has a certain style of writing.
Sure. Yeah.
How hard or easy was it for you to adopt that?
Yeah. So the nuts and bolts of sort of the quality standards were kind of easier to pick up on, and some of the stuff that we try to do that sort of differentiates this, and this is stuff that Pep's done for a long time, is to cite the original research. So, going back to sort of, the academic journals, if they have them, if it's, a thing about psychology, but really finding the hard research to back up claims versus sort of making your claims, just saying what you want. And then also just lots of examples and very practically kind of how to focus. So really giving people the information that they need to actually execute on things versus just kind of what you often see now with stuff, which is you have a lot of freelancers and generalists who are writing about things that they've never done, and they're sort of believing that their job as the writer is to pretend to be an expert rather than to go find the expertise and incorporate it. So another thing that you'll often see on the CXL blog is a lot of like long form block quotes from really, really smart people and practitioners. And it's something that I wish existed more broadly, because it's really easy if you're a writer or an editor to say, you know what, this is a little bit outside my expertise, but I know these 5 people who have been doing this for a decade and are super, super smart, and I can go ask them good questions. And then basically all my article writing is just writing transitions between their quotes, rather than trying to say, I've never done this, but I need to pretend like I have, and then going out and making a bunch of claims. So that's what we've still tried to stick with. And that's certainly something that Pep started. As far as the style of writing goes, I've definitely failed on that front. And I don't know that I would try to replicate, Pep's style. It's a great sort of informal, honest, conversational style to writing that I think was part of the reason the blog picked up on early on, because it's, some of this stuff is really technical. You talk about, A/B testing statistics, or you're talking about, user research or some of the psychology behind things, behavioral psychology. Some of that can get pretty academic, but he always had a sort of like what he would call like a no bullshit, like very straightforward, use human language way to approach it, which I think made it more accessible for a lot of people in a way that it hadn't been previously.
Yeah. And to put it in business perspective, basically the blog is a generator for CXL, the agency, but also for the paywall content, the courses, right?
Yep. It's been the primary acquisition engine for a long, long time. We're still very much organic traffic focused, as far as probably like, if you look at analytics, you could say that roughly 80% of every site visit comes organically to a blog post. So it's for most people their initial encounter with CXL. The interesting and challenging part about that from a content perspective years down the road is that after you've published 700 posts, you've kind of covered like the core stuff that is most relevant to you, that's going to have a high search volume. So then you're in a choice of kind of how do we balance like staying on brand and wanting to do stuff that's in depth, but also keep that acquisition engine going, because usually the more in depth, the more specific something is, the smaller the search volume is going to be. So you're kind of having to balance some of those things, which I don't know that you ever sort of settle on it. You just kind of go back and forth. But one of the challenges and that you find if you are focused on organic search is it's really easy to just start covering introductory stuff, because that's where all the search volume is. A lot of the basics like how to, whatever else, which historically hasn't really been on brand for the blog. So trying to balance some of those needs. Luckily with Pep, I mean, this is, anybody that's involved in content or just in a company that relies on content, to have somebody at the top who started, all the acquisitions and based on the blog, he really knows and understands and appreciates the value that content provides as part of the first part of that funnel of bringing people in. Yeah. So it's not something where I have to like go out and convince him, or that I have to get permission to like write about something that's super cool that probably has no search volume, that, maybe it gets picked up on social media and some newsletters, maybe it doesn't. I could obviously write like a basic what is marketing term kind of post and get more traffic. But we've always had the buy-in from him to sort of go out and try to cover the cool stuff, even if it doesn't necessarily max out what it looks like in analytics.
Yeah. And speaking of content, yearly you guys do a little market research and are gracious enough to share that with us and post about that. So can you introduce the survey to our listeners?
Sure, yeah, and thanks for letting us talk about it. It's something that takes a lot of work, and because it often comes out in December, if people are already off for the holidays, it's gone, and then it's like, well, maybe next year. But no, it's we've been doing it since 2016, which is pretty fun. So now we're starting to get some of that longitudinal data of picking up some trends that are happening in the conversion optimization industry. But it's a pretty robust. Takes about 10 minutes to complete. We send it out to people that we know. We usually partner with somebody else. We partnered with Convert.com this year to help get some more awareness for the survey. But it's kind of a comprehensive look at conversion optimization, both from the nuts and bolts of kind of the demographics of who's doing it. What are the salary ranges in different countries? Some of that fun information so that people can take the survey back to their boss and demand a raise, or if they're getting paid more than most people, to not bring it up. And then also, the most interesting or exciting part for me is always the open-ended questions, where you kind of learn about, hey, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing, and seeing how some of those compare year over year. Always fascinating to see an industry that, since we started doing it in 2016, you can certainly this year especially get a sense that there's both a maturity in the industry that's starting to grow, which is both good and bad as far as it's opening up new challenges for people, and then a kind of democratization of a lot of people doing CRO now that, based on the tech, probably wasn't feasible for them to do 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, it also includes what people actually do, right? I mean, CRO is a bit of an overarching term.
Sure.
Do people actually do A/B tests, multivariate tests, user research? What kind of things do you actually perform?
Sure, and it's still the predominant thing is people are running A/B tests. I mean, we ask them sort of, are you doing ABN or multivariate tests, like you're doing different things, and it usually comes down to people are still for the most part running those A/B tests, and a pretty sort of straightforward testing program. For some people, we see they're doing that in Google Ads, or they're doing that via email, as well as working on site. But it's a lot of what we've seen this year, to some degree more than other years, is a lot of people being limited by traffic. A few of which cited COVID making things difficult, because either they lost a lot of traffic they expected, or there were just these wild fluctuations that they couldn't predict when certain places went into lockdown, where you might have been in the middle of a testing cycle and all of a sudden, the lockdown, your traffic drops off a cliff. Some of that, I think, is also from people getting involved, where Google Optimize, certainly it was, this was the first year that we'd actually asked people about what their kind of favorite testing tool was. And interestingly, Google Optimize had almost twice the number of mentions as VWO and Optimizely combined. So you see how quickly Google comes into a market and offers a free product, and all of a sudden it's everybody's favorite product, partly because it's free, which means that if you're somewhere that's never done it before, you now have a tool that you can do it for free. But now some of those people are running the challenge of, well, I don't really have enough users to run those tests. And as you mentioned, the other thing that came up a lot this year were people struggling with generating great hypotheses and getting the user research to generate really strong hypotheses for their tests. That was one challenge. And the other challenge that has always been the top challenge that conversion optimizers have listed is getting buy-in. And part of that buy-in being getting buy-in to sort of trust the testing process, to not, give in to the hippo, the CEO, what they want to test. So you saw people kind of having two different problems with test hypotheses. One, really having the research to do it. And two, convincing their boss that, yes, we really should follow this data, not just test, the shiny object that you saw or the thing that you saw your competitor do. But buy-in has always been, you see some of the open-ended responses, and the things like getting my idiot boss to stop, bothering, there's some frustration that comes out at some point in some of these responses. But it's fascinating. You kind of see the two branches of, you have the more mature testing programs where we're seeing people talk about things like trying to develop a culture of experimentation in their organizations, or trying to create a center of excellence for testing within their organization, which are sort of signals to me of an industry that's a little more mature versus people just saying, I don't know how to interpret my A/B testing results. And then you also have the people now that are starting with Google optimized, that don't really have a budget, that may not have the users, the traffic, don't have a history of doing user research, or in small companies. And they're trying to figure out, how do I run meaningful tests when I don't have a lot of users, when I don't have a big budget for research, when it's, brand new for my organization to be thinking about this as a discipline. So you see kind of those two things with the maturity from just, conversion optimization has been around for a little while now. And then you also see those new entrants that are kind of coming in at the bottom, trying to develop processes for the first time. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the demographics of all the participants? Where do they come from? What do they do?
Sure. It's the bulk, I want to say plurality, but not a majority, are usually from the US. And then you take Western Europe as a block, and that's probably 2/3 to 3/4. We actually had a decent chunk from India this year. And again, we had 400 respondents. That's sort of ballpark for where we usually are. We know that, it's a survey, it's 400 respondents. If we're testing like a vaccine here, this is probably not a representative sample to, be statistically significant in every possible way, but it's a really good chunk of people. And we always have, the Netherlands is actually always one of the highest as far as response rates, as well as the UK is. So it's, even at CXL Institute, we have a lot of Dutch customers. So it's Netherlands certainly seems to have its niche there in conversion optimization. I don't know if you perceive that there, but
it's where we started the podcast, right? So that's why because obviously
we can find a correlation in that data, perhaps. And then you look at salaries, and salaries have been pretty stable as far as they're sort of what you would expect as far as US is usually up there, like Germany, Switzerland are up there, and then a little bit farther behind are kind of the rest of Western Europe, and then Australia kind of sneaks in there every now and then. But overall, I mean, we're seeing, and again, we're asking people for salaries in US dollars, so we assume that they're translating their salaries from euros accurately. There's a chance that they're not, but we're looking at salary ranges. But you're still looking at, it's a good paying profession as far as, if you're somewhere in North America or Europe, you can expect, on average to make around $65,000 a year, just as an average salary. And then you look at, one of the fun things we get to look at is sort of look at the years of experience versus salary. And one of the things that you see is that there's sort of a jump at 2 years where you kind of go from that like brand new analyst to all of a sudden you're an analyst now. And then at that 4-year mark, once you've been kind of there for 4 years, is when you can expect to get up into that, closer to 6 figures. It's still, there's a decent chunk of people making 6 figures. Most of those are based in the US or some of the highest income European countries. And then there are a few people making over 150K a year doing CRO work, so or optimization work. So it's a good, solid profession. I mean, compared to some of what I would see as the average salaries in like an SEO or PPC role, I think CRO is compensated well. And I think that there's a reason for that. It's a very technical skill set. Compared to some of those other ones, it's certainly in an entry level way. Like if you gotta know your stats, you gotta know your math, you've got to understand some aspects of HTML to be able to run proper tests and that kind of stuff, and do user research. And I think that's generally been reflected in the salaries that we've seen, which have been stable this year. We didn't really see a big change.
Well, I think it's a weird mix because at CRO there's a lot of elements, like you said, it's research, it's technical stuff. You need to know how Google Analytics works, or maybe even need to manage Google Analytics as a CRO specialist. Maybe some front end development qualities that you need to possess. And often when the team grows or when it's a bigger company, it gets split up. So you don't necessarily have one CRO specialist in a senior role, but you have multiple medium roles, media roles, instead of one person doing CRO overall, and maybe those other roles that just report to like an e-com director or something. And there's no not a lot of companies that have a really senior CRO role, I think.
Yeah, the that aspect of sort of touching on like different fields, the kind of cross team collaboration is one of those things that keeps coming up too in the survey as far as one of the challenges of working across teams and the the interesting things that CROs try to have to deal with at times, whatever your title is, which is we had some people saying they were trying to balance site updates with brand requirements from the brand team in their company. And so these really interesting challenges of, okay, like you have this thing that you think based on your research is going to convert better, but then you have a brand team that's telling you, well, we don't quite feel like this is the right tone for us. And having to navigate some of those conversations and the fact that for, I think it's at least 3 years now, we've seen that getting, executive or company-wide buy-in be the top challenge that people have. As much as the technical skills matter to do the job right, you can see how much the people who are able to walk into a room and be persuasive with C-suite people, the people who know how to explain why it is that you should only run tests based on hypotheses that are data-backed, how you explain the value of a test that fails but provided really good learning. Those things that seem really, really critical that if I were somebody who was looking to advance my career or, that I want to be overseeing a team that's running a center of excellence for a large organization or something like that, that's helping improve the standards of testing in general, like those soft skills seem like they're absolutely vital because for so many people, it's not just that, it's really the biggest roadblock they face in being able to do things correctly in a way that have impacts.
Yeah. Yeah. And for many of them, it's also quite important. Like you said, with that culture, is it also important for your company and you as a CRO specialist then to improve things like service or things that don't necessarily directly bring in more money, but save time from customer service because you're less annoying on the website or people ask less questions? And do you get the time to do that and to focus on that or not? Or do you only need or can only focus on the things that directly are related to more revenue?
Sure. And we even saw somebody who mentioned that they were trying to get their company to implement a sort of conversion optimization mindset to offline activities. So you can imagine a retail setting, building in some of that culture of, experimentation or whatever the learnings are and trying to fold those into maybe, training for retail store employees. So, I mean, those are some of the fascinating things where I don't again, like a few years ago, it probably, some of the challenges were more basic and rudimentary. And now you really see people trying to, have a much more expansive perspective on what conversion optimization, whether you want to call it conversion optimization or revenue optimization or, optimizing the customer experience, whatever that becomes, trying to take that more holistic perspective, which you think ultimately is going to place some of the people who are on the ground floor now in conversion optimization in higher positions in a company. Like it feels, when you see some of the challenges they're trying to solve, this feels like a very high level role in the company. This isn't somebody that can be sort of sequestered off as, oh, you're a CRO person and you do your little UX tests and we leave you alone. Like this is somebody who then becomes central to a lot of the decision making that goes on.
Yeah. Are there any questions added this year or changed? A
lot of it we try to keep consistent just so we get that longitudinal data. We did ask this year kind of if people we always ask what their biggest challenge is, which is the one we try to, as much as I love open-ended, I also know that people love to just be able to click a radio button and move on. So we did ask people if they had kind of what their aspirations were or hopes were for 2021. Ultimately, a lot of those answers ended up being just kind of the reverse image of the challenges. So if the challenge was we have a really bad process, the goal was to develop great processes. So probably a bit of a swing and a miss on adding that question there. We did ask people about both the testing tool they preferred using, which was kind of impressive to see how much Google Optimize just kind of walked in and said, hey, we're here and we're now taking over in the same way that Google Analytics has kind of taken over a lot of the baseline for analytics. And we also asked people about their favorite analytics tools. And again, like that one, less surprising, Google Analytics was the clear favorite and kind of an unexpected set of players beyond that. But there was also, we had, I want to say 17 respondents out of 400 when we asked them about their testing tools that it was proprietary, like in-house, built from scratch. So, I mean, it's pretty serious business at that point. So those are probably your enterprise people working there, but
those are the Dutch people from Bol.com and Booking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, that's, it'll be one of the, I think, things that we'll be able to do. It'll be interesting this year. We haven't done yet because we just finished taking in responses basically over the weekend. And so yesterday all day, I was just digging through the data and looking and coding some of the qualitative responses. And because we've done some of that baseline work now, historically, like, it's CXL, it's a startup, it's content, like you get as much as you can, you get it out the door and you keep moving fast. So we've often only had time to do some of the kind of baseline analysis. And we'll look at a few segments, or we'll pair a couple of demographic points like, country or years of experience with some other things to see what we can get. But because we've kind of already done really quickly this baseline, Bud, who works with me on the blog, is going to have a chance to really dive into some of the segments and look into a little more detail than we probably have in previous years to maybe pull out some additional insights with the same data that we have, to spend a little more time with it. So if there's anything that you think you want to know right now would be the time to bring it up. If there are any like particular curiosities or way that you want to prepare any kind of data, and you have ideas, let me know, either now or after.
Derek at CXL.com.
Yeah, if it gets out there in time. Yeah, for sure.
And are there any, do you know of any results that broke the trend in 2020, where we saw a trend previously, but 2020 reversed that trend?
So this will not come as a total shock, but when you look at 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, we had 3 questions that one asked, compared to last year, is conversion optimization more, less, or the same as far as effectiveness? Compared to last year, is it prioritized more, or less, the same? Compared to last year, is the budget more, or less, the same? The past 4 years, basically, it had been an upward trend the whole time, a slow trend, but basically every year people were saying it's more effective, it's more of a priority, I've got a bigger budget. This year, for the first time, it was basically, we saw that either flatten or go down. For instance, I think historically we had never had more than like 6 or 8% of people say that CRO was less effective compared to last year. And this year we had 12%. So that's, almost a double the amount. Even though it's a small minority, still across the board, you could see that people were struggling a little bit this year. There were only a handful of mentions of sort of COVID specific things that were in the qualitative responses. So that didn't seem totally front and center, but this was really the first year that we saw some of those struggles. And I don't want to sort of, again, going back to that kind of initial takeaway of, we see both the maturity on one side and then running into some new challenges of kind of trying to do some of these, bigger projects, these center of excellence sort of ideas. And then we also see this democratization of like new people coming in. I think some of those challenges were not just because things were getting worse, but because the industry is maturing. So when you look at, some things we would hear on the qualitative responses were, we basically picked all the low hanging fruit at this point, and we're struggling to develop more hypotheses that can really move the needle. So again, it's like, that's not a sign that it's less effective so much as you've been doing it for a little while now. You've kind of probably fixed your biggest, ugliest UX issues, and now you're trying to figure out where is that next win that's really going to generate revenue. Or on the flip side, if you have some of the people that are just starting out and they're struggling to get wins because they've never done it before, but for the first time ever, maybe they can do it because they have access to something like Google Optimize. Those aren't necessarily bad signs of the industry so much as it's just a different set of problems. So you fold that in maybe with just some of the overall chaos of 2020 and maybe teams having to deal with working remotely, and maybe it's harder to persuade the C-suite if you're not in the room with them and can't give them a nice shiny slide deck, and instead, your internet's cutting in and out and you're, like me, sitting with a boring blank wall behind you. Maybe those are some of the challenges.
Yeah, and definitely I think that in 2020 it became clear to a lot of people in CRO what the position of CRO was in the company.
Sure.
Either it was because these are extreme times, extreme circumstances for those companies. Either it was going really well or not so much, and you had to explain a lot of things.
Sure. I remember a quote from somebody that was secular tailwinds hide all sins. So the idea that when things are going well, you can kind of get away with a lot of, suboptimal practices. And now all of a sudden, like you say, like for some people, all of a sudden, where maybe the last few years, the CEO wasn't really asking you to calculate a really hard ROI for your program. Now all of a sudden, when, maybe budgets are getting cut, now you're having to do that. Maybe now that puts the pressure on, we need to find those wins that aren't just the micro conversions of more leads, more clicks, whatever. We need to find those macro conversions of how we actually generating bottom line revenue compared to the expenses that it costs to run this program. The question of, and this probably isn't unique to conversion optimization, but another thing that usually comes up is sort of just the lack of human resources in general. Sort of, we wish we could run more tests. We don't have the time to do it. Or some people would say, we spend most of our time fixing bugs in existing tests instead of developing ideas and running new tests. So that QA component, that again is probably one of those, they wish they had a full-time person just to do QA, but they don't. And so then you have people that are, just focused on kind of tidying things up versus really coming up with ideas or implementing ideas to really generate a lot of revenue.
Yeah. How are you using this survey for your content next year?
Sure. So, I mean, to be honest, we've done it. We don't have. It's not a huge moneymaker for us. We don't do this survey because we have some very structured way to generate revenue. We do it because we love conversion optimization. We think of ourselves as close to the center of that universe and feel like it's an important thing and useful thing to do for the industry. And so mostly it is kind of to go out there and say, hey, people, here's all the data that you want. Like, here's everything that we could figure out. I think, some of the things that we've learned at CXL in general is that, one of the things that people need the most help with as far as when it comes to, can I Google an answer to this versus do I really need a course and an instructor to kind of walk me through it? Usually the more technical a topic is, the more you kind of need that hand holding. So you can imagine, if it's setting up a specific set of GTM tags, or we're talking about like identifying certain types of errors and testing via statistics and that kind of stuff, it kind of helps to have somebody explain that to you versus you may struggle just to read a blog post and walk away with that. So we've always felt like as course content, the kind of stuff that provides the most value that people really feel the need for is usually more technical. And I don't think that's changed. I think some of the things that recur that people could probably solve already is some of the process-based components. I mean, to be honest, the process that Pep developed, that CXL agency uses both for identifying test hypotheses, for prioritizing tests, those are all publicly available on the blog and have been for years and years and years as far as frameworks. And that is a lot of what people tend to bring up in the qualitative responses as far as one of the struggles is having this process and framework. Some of that stuff's already out there. But both definitely data quality and data analysis tend to come up a lot. Data quality, obviously, you have people that are trying to integrate data across multiple tools, are dealing with, GDPR or new things that are coming out that are kind of changing what data they have access to, as well as the data analysis component of really saying, okay, one side is being able to trust your data to get accurate data. The other is, can you open up analytics and can you stare at analytics and pull out something that's really going to help you develop a hypothesis? Can you really learn about user behavior rather than just knowing sort of where to find a report? So we have,
especially for people that have a different background, not necessarily an analytical background, going into zero, but more like coming from a content background, design background, user research background. You might not have the skills to dive into Google Analytics and fix all the data problems, right? So
sure,
that might be a big issue.
Sure, and you can kind of take that a step further too, which is the thing that comes up a lot of times is the challenge of setting good KPIs for conversion optimization, which is both sort of, statistically valid KPIs, things that data they can trust, data that matters, but also at sometimes, that I know from being an analyst, some of the things that I might look at as an analyst are really in the weeds, but they're not going to translate to a meeting with either your client or other stakeholders. So finding a KPI that a stakeholder is going to accept as both valid and meaningful, and at the same time, one that really is representative of your work. So again, those are some of those things. It does feel to some degree, maybe like these are soft skill challenges. It's like you need that hard skill background of really understanding how to get data out of analytics that matters, but at the same time, figuring out how to translate that into, something that's going to resonate with people throughout your organization. So we've never really done soft skill stuff at CXL Institute. I don't know that that's going to be a priority, but I think you see for some people, for some people at the entry level who haven't done it before, yes, they need those technical skills. Other people who've been doing it for years now and have mastered those technical skills could probably stand to spend a quarter really learning some of those softer skills, whether it's with clients or internally, to kind of remove some of the roadblocks that they face.
Yeah, cool. And I think it's really interesting. So for the survey, I'm really looking forward to the report. When people want to download it, where do they go?
Sure. So we'll publish it on the CXL blog next week. It'll be either Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on the chaos of startup life.
And next week will be this week when we publish it. So
sorry,
you can,
December 8th or 9th.
Yeah.
I should have had that right. That was an old thing that used to get me in trouble with editing encyclopedias. So these are print encyclopedias back in the day. And so if you put in a thing like, a recent report, Well, if that encyclopedia sits on the shelf for 5 years, recent is no longer recent. And so you just, like in your mind, you just had to scratch out all these words. So December 8th or 9th, we like to publish kind of a blog post version that'll have maybe 7 or 8 kind of high-level takeaways. And then there'll be a PDF report downloadable with kind of all the data that we have. And so some of that basic stuff we know, some of it hopefully will come up with some new interesting things from segmenting some of this data further than we usually get to. But
Do you already have things that you think, oh, we should do this differently next year?
I think, one, it would be great to get more data always. 400 responses is great. If we get 1,000 or 1,500, it would be interesting. Just because usually not from the top level takeaways, but that would give us some more flexibility to segment in a meaningful way, to not be segmenting down to, oh, we had 10 responses in this segment. And at that point, what are you really looking at? That would always be great. But I think we've honestly probably just underutilized the information that we have at this point, because we have that potential to look at some stuff and to kind of take some of those cross sections of looking at, if you have 3 years of experience, where you should expect to be, or what are the problems that people have year 1, year 2, year 3 compared to people who've been doing it for a decade. Those are some of the really interesting questions. It's somewhat speculative for me to say, there's this soft skill issue with people who've been around for a while. And that's one of those things I would like to be able to dig in and validate. Maybe we'll be able to do that this year. But yeah, probably added maybe a couple more open-ended questions, just because the responses are always fascinating. There was one person out of 400 responses who, when we asked what their biggest challenge was, their response was NA, or non-applicable. So there's one person who's figured all of it out. I don't know who this is.
We need to track that person down.
Yeah. So maybe
he or she should do a course.
I was about to say, yeah. So then we'll find this person. They can be our instructor, because clearly, if they haven't solved every problem, they've solved the anxiety of not having solved every problem. So they've gotten something done.
There's some value in there, definitely. So thank you so much. We're all looking forward to the report, and we'll include a download link in the show notes when it's available. So one of my final questions for you will be, so with your background and doing this for a while, doing the survey for a while, do you have an insight for us as CROs or the CRO world, an insight that you think you have that others might not have picked on, have not picked up yet?
Sure. I think, looking at content and knowing that at times, content plays a role in generating conversions for people. Producing content is really expensive. And often what I see, especially in kind of the gated content, which is, a common way to generate leads, is people put in way more effort than they have to create something compelling for people to exchange their email for. So the idea of sort of people think that you have to create this 150-page ebook to convince somebody to give you their email, where really, if you have a 1-page process checklist about how you do something, that can be really tantalizing and really, really easy to produce. And at the end of the day, most people are choosing whether or not they're going to exchange their email based on what that landing page content is, based on what you're promising them. They're not going to see that 150-page ebook until after they've already given you their email. So it's almost like people creating content or thinking about content are looking at it and not thinking about where that real element of persuasion is happening, which is with the landing page. You certainly have to fulfill a promise. You can't tell people that you're giving them the best piece of content ever, and it's a 5-page PDF with stock photos and terrible information. But in general, the more you can think about sort of streamlining that content production, it is certainly one opportunity. And the other thing that I've seen in a B2B world, especially if you're paying for expensive clicks on LinkedIn and that kind of thing, is you can pre-qualify people with some of that landing page copy and kind of the angle that you take with your content. So say you have, for instance, our current state of conversion optimization survey. If we wanted to use this as like a lead magnet on LinkedIn or something like that, you're going to pay several dollars per click. If we just pitch it as, hey, this is the state of optimization survey, that's going to go after a really wide audience that maybe we don't want. We could segment that data just a little bit to say that, for B2B, this is, the state of B2B optimization at enterprise companies. If that's our target audience, you can just tweak that content a little bit. You can tweak that ad copy a little bit, and you end up pre-qualifying that audience. So you're not going to pay for a bunch of clicks from people that really aren't in your target audience. So even with the same content, sometimes you can make just little tiny changes either to the way the content's laid out, what the title page says or which segment you provide or what the ad copy is. That's really pretty inexpensive to do and can certainly save you some money on some of those ad clicks, or just get you a little more pre-qualified audience. Bring in, obviously, people who are going to download that are probably in that segment. So maybe that's information that you can push to your CRM. That's remarketing you can do. That's a separate email list. You can put them in, all without really having to create a complete standalone. Okay, what's the 150-page ebook that we do for B2B enterprise? What's the 150-page ebook we do for B2C? There are efficiencies to find there.
Okay, nice. Are you also involved with Pep's new project, copy testing?
I'm not involved with copy testing. I'm actually involved in another different project called Adapt.
Adapt.
Mm-hmm. So never a dull moment. So Adapt has been an interesting. It really is trying to kind of distill a lot of marketing content to really, really actionable checklists. Which the fascinating part of that is language becomes really, really important as far as the verb you choose, whether or not you use an adjective. For instance, if I told you to use a user research tool to gather relevant information. Well, if you've never done that before, the word relevant is completely meaningless to you. If I'm saying, so what you have to do is say, well, what do you really mean by relevant? What is the specific data that you expect to gather? And if that's saying you want to gather like motivations, doubts, whatever, you have to do that. And so what you find is if you're sourcing this information, you're having people write it. Novices love to use, for instance, they love to use adjectives because they don't know. So they just say relevant because it's the easiest way for them to get away with it. And that's what you'll also see a lot of stuff that clutters up page one of search results is that kind of like cheap freelancer content that people don't really know what they're talking about, but they can kind of pretend like they know what they're talking about. And then you find experts who will say, gather relevant information or set appropriate KPIs because they've done it so many darn times that they know what they're doing. They don't feel like they have to explain what a reasonable KPI target might be. So it's sort of unpacking some of those assumptions that people buried into their processes and really getting to the nuts and bolts. It's honestly, I think it's not so much about just distilling what you might think of as taking a 3,000 word blog post and creating a checklist out of it. It's more about, if you think about like a recipe website and the idea of you can't say, how to make a chicken is not get a chicken, cook it until it's done, make a nice pan sauce and enjoy. Like that's a terrible recipe, but that's a lot of what the marketing content out there is telling you. It's saying like, get a good hypothesis based on data, run your test until it hits significance, and then implement the results. And a lot of people say like, well, wait, how do I do that stuff? So that Adapt is really trying to figure out, okay, how do we create recipes out of stuff that often is not clear enough to action on?
Yeah, don't just tell me step 1 to 5, but also tell me 1A, 1B, 1C.
Exactly. Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar. There's a cartoon of sort of making fun of it. It's how to draw an owl, and the first step is you draw one big circle for the body and one little circle for the head, and the next step is draw the rest of the fucking owl, and it's this beautiful like professional art is finished. And for all of us out there, there's like, well, something's happening in between these two things that I really need to know. Yeah. So we're trying to unpack all of that. And it's wonderfully challenging and painful. When Pep first talked about it and asked if I'd be interested in kind of running lead on content on that, it was like, well, this sounds really impossible. So yeah, let's try to do this. So there's been a lot that we've learned. And I'm actually, there'll be a blog post that's going out that'll already be live at this point that I'm publishing that's kind of sharing some of the early learnings from that process too.
Yeah, and people can already subscribe or donate to it. It's not live yet, right? So you can already subscribe to the first X years. Yeah,
Def, you can basically get in and there's a get early access and basically kind of pay now for 1 year and get 3 years. So
is already a release date.
It's going to be in the spring. Mm-hmm. We're basically we have an existing kind of early user group now that we're going to start doing some beta tests with as far as what the UX actually looks like. We have, I'm trying to think now, maybe 500 to 700 playbooks so far. And that'll be probably in the neighborhood of maybe 2,000 by the time we start to go live. And then from there, just to keep building on that, we're trying to kind of cover the core things first. And then we're excited about getting people in there that can then share kind of really niche processes that are going to help people, not just I need to run an A/B test, but I need to run an A/B test for a product description on a fashion website. Some of those really detailed things are going to have those little bits of information that kind of make it seem so much more relevant to what you're working on rather than the generic instructions that you then have to translate to whatever you're doing.
Yeah, cool. So, but before it's spring, we need to do more stuff, especially with the podcast. We want more content. So do you have some tips for us for who I should ask on the show?
Let me think. Because I'm spoiled because working with the blog, I constantly get access to people that are writing posts for us that do really, really smart and interesting things.
Are there people out there that you haven't been able to get for the blog? that you wanted but that don't like writing or something?
Sure. So this is, I think, what I'd say about one of the things that I've learned from doing it is that the people that will give you, there are the people out there that are the people with tens of thousands of Twitter followers that you're lucky if you can get the time of day from them, but they're also getting hit up so much to do content that if you get them, they're probably going to give you some piece of an idea that they've already been sharing the last year and are going to share for the next 6 months. There's a subset of people who are sort of like on the rise and they're like in the weeds practitioners, but they will pour out their heart and soul and give you this thing that they've been working on for 2 years that they've never shared with anybody. So those are always usually my favorites for the blog because they just give us so much value. And it's brand new, really interesting stuff. There's you could talk to Kevin Indig. I don't know if you know him. He does SEO and content. He used to be at Atlassian, but now he's at G2. And he does some of the interesting things that could be fun things to talk about with him are, at scale, SEO becomes more about making decisions about templates and kind of broader changes to the whole user experience. There's also Will Critchlow, who used to run the agency Distilled that he sold, and now he has been running a SaaS company that does SEO testing. So it's a combination of like CRO and SEO. And the idea is to be able to test changes to templates. Again, like if you have a product page and you're wondering, should we move this? If we move this element here, how's that going to affect search? And that can be kind of complicated because Google doesn't like you to show it one thing to show users another thing. So you have to be really careful about how you do it. But they've been developing a testing tool to be able to do that, which would probably be an interesting intersection, again, as conversion optimization continues to kind of become a more holistic company-wide practice to see where they're starting to bump into where you have to make decisions that both conversion optimizers and SEOs and your brand people and your CEO all sign off on to really have an impact. Because if you are somewhere at a bigger company and you've been there for a while, you've probably solved like all just the really crummy UX issues that you have. And you are having to look at, we need to make these big changes now, but we can't kill off organic acquisition if that's millions of visitors a year.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a great topic. And again, something that popped up in the survey, right? So,
and if I will have to also put in a plug. I don't know if you've talked to Chanel Mullen before. She used to do content at CXL, but she now does CRO in-house for Shopify. And she is wonderful and brilliant. And she's a great intersection of somebody who has really broad knowledge from having done CXL blog for a while and also has the everyday in the weeds of being a practitioner at a large and very quickly growing company. So she would be a fun one too.
Good. Those are great tips. So thank you so much. Thanks, Derek, for introducing us to the survey results from this year. We'll look forward to the report and look forward to talking to you again next year.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, we'll be here.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.